Hotepu. Let's continue our adventure into the Papyrus of Ani of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and we're going to start here with the remainder of line 6, which begins here at my cursor, this oval here, Tatunen wa. So from this oval here to the number 7. So we're only going to cover 2 words, Tatunen wa. And Budge says this means, Hail Tatunen, or Tatun, who art one. Now, this line is most profound. It is a very deep mystery being revealed in 2 simple Kemetic words. So let's zoom into this fractal and see some of the patterns hiding within it. Okay. So, first of all, Tatunen, here, this means ta-u-enen, and it ends with this figure of the seated man here, the seated god, I should say. Tatunen is a god of primeval matter. He is a god of, the word ta here, this oval with the 3 dots, means earth, or land, or matter, or mass. So Tatunen was a god of land, in particular the first land, the original land, the infinite land. He corresponds to the level of energy matter that is formless. There is a state of universal energy matter, matter itself, before it took shape. So we call him the clay. Clay is made of earth, and it's moist because you can mold it, basically. Not baked clay, but malleable clay. So he is the god of malleable clay. And we use the metaphor of a piece of malleable clay, and we jumped it quantum leap scale invariance to huge proportions, saying, well, the deepest stratum of the universe's material nature is like clay. It is shapeless, it is formless, it is homogeneous. Some say homogeneous, but I like to say homogeneous. And so, when you descend into any particle, any thing in the universe, you get more and more fundamental levels of particles. There comes a point you will never find a single particle. What will happen is that the particles, like we had atoms, which became electrons and protons, which became quarks, which became gluons, and they keep going deeper and deeper and finding more and more particles. And they're looking for what they call the God particle, which they'll never find, because every particle is a fractal, meaning it can be zoomed in infinitely. You can keep going into the smallest particle and find even tinier ones forever. That's the definition of a fractal zoom. And we have a video on the Mandelbrot fractal, and there's a link on that video page to a YouTube video where someone did a wonderful video with Baroque music showing how you can zoom into anything in the universe infinitely. No matter how tiny, it keeps going tinier and tinier and tinier. So they'll never find a single God particle. What will happen is, there's a point when you zoom in towards the tiniest particle, what they call the Planck's distance. And the Planck's distance, by the way, is simply the smallest particle that our senses can perceive. Given how our eyes work and how our senses work, what's called the Planck's distance is the tiniest thing that our senses can register. That does not mean it is the tiniest particle, and that's the mistake of many physicists. If we had different senses, more evolved, more equipped senses, we would see things beyond the Planck's distance. So it's relative to our size, our scale, and to the apparatus of our senses. But even in the Planck's distance, if you zoomed into it, you start finding smaller things, I guarantee it. And there comes a point, which they don't know about yet in science, that the white scientists have not figured this out yet, but I will tell them, because the Kamau knew this thousands of years ago. If you keep zooming in past the Planck's distance, there comes a certain plane where there's a quantum jump, where it shifts from particles or wavicles, particles and waves, into nothingness, just space, like blank space. But that space is not empty. It is matter in a completely equilibrated state where everything cancels out so it looks like zero. And in that state, that's the original state, what's called in the black yoga tradition of Dravidia, South India, Mula Prakriti. Mula Prakriti, the root matter, the fundamental phase or step or stage of matter, where there are no particles. It's just, it looks like emptiness, completely empty. But what I'm telling you is at that stage, it is completely balanced. There are no disturbances in the equations, so they all cancel out and equal zero, and zero looks like nothing. So you are made of particles, the trees are made of particles, the chair you're sitting is made of particles, the computer you're looking at is made of particles. Those are particles that we can perceive because they're in an imbalanced state. Their equations are not fully balanced, so we can perceive them. But if every part of their structure was completely balanced, we would say there's nothing there. A zero net sum effect. So Tatunin corresponds to this place that white scientists will one day find of cosmic matter that has no structures to it, that no apparent structure, no shapes or forms. It's just like a blob of clay with no shape. Space is that very same thing, because you're sitting in a room and you see the computer in front of you and a chair beneath you and a floor beneath you and a roof above you, but you don't see the space around you. You don't see anything there. It looks empty to you. This is called in physics the vacuum. And all modern physicists know the vacuum is hardly empty. It just looks empty. You see? So the space you're in is self-similar to Tatunin. It is him on this plane. You see? Imagine you're being in an ocean, you're underwater or something, in a pool, swimming pool. And if there are no waves, you would think you're floating in nothing. If there's nothing in there, there's no light coming through, it's just nothing in there, you would not see the water. It just looks like nothing to you. But there's a lot of water, a lot of things going on there. So imagine in that total still flotation tank or ocean or swimming pool, an eddy appears, a whirlpool, kind of a hurricane tornado under the water. What's happening is now space is structuring itself. The water, which once appeared to be empty and blank and not even there, all of a sudden forms a shape, a pattern, a fractal, a Fibonacci spiral that we call Neheb-Kau, the two-headed snake of torsion-Coriolis effect that creates spirals, and the spirals create density towards their center, and density creates heat. Heat creates kinetic forces, which explode into suns. So when a sun is being born, what's happening is the Kamau said that the universe is called Nun, the great cosmic water. Also, it's called Tatunin, same word, same meaning, a different emphasis. So the Kamau viewed the universe, they viewed space as self-similar to water. It is not water. It is analogous to water. It has many properties of water. It is neutral, it's clear, you can't really see it. It gives life to all things. Space is neutral, you can't see it. Tatunin is neutral, you can't see it. Nun is neutral, you can't see him. You see? So if you want to understand the nature of space, which quantum physicists are trying to study, you might want to go to Egypt. I will do a workshop or a lecture on this topic before long in a very detailed fashion about space and the vacuum. But they call it the vacuum. And they are working now on extracting energy from the vacuum, where a tiny, itty bitty, itsy bitsy, teeny weeny amount of energy from the vacuum could fuel the Earth for tens of thousands of years. Because that void, that vacuum, is full of potential energy. And they're trying to find ways to extract that and make it kinetic energy. We had the same teaching in Kemet. When you go into this place of Tatunen here, this land, the word Ta means land, Tatunen, Tut means image, like King Tutankhamun. Tut means image. So the land that has future images in it but is inert. The word enen, tatun, can be tatunen, tatuenen. This here means enen. The word enen means inert, passive. And you see here a plant trying to bloom, meaning a future blooming, a future manifestation, a future structure. But right now it's passive. And it has these waves of electromagnetic force. But they are frozen waves, meaning they are static. They are potential. And they're showing two waves here because one is electric, one is magnetic. But they are equalized. They are zero net effect. It's saying potential electromagnetic force is waiting to happen in this passive state, and that you can imprint images in this matter, ideas or archetypes, in the clay, but it won't come to life yet because everything here is inert. That's why the God shown here is shown almost in a hollow kind of figure. No details to his body. He's shown kind of empty or full of space. You see, like an empty space here. You see? And he's shown squatting. His legs are completely squatting. Versus the other sitting figures. Look here. Legs up, legs up, legs up. Here, completely passive. You see? And he's holding this flail. But you have a passive God holding the flail of electricity. The flail represents electricity. Represents centrifugal force. That although right now I'm sitting quietly, I will one day become externalized. I will one day go into action, become kinetic, not potential energy. But right now I'm sitting quietly as a future potential of externalization of EM field forces that bloom into forms of the universe. Stars, galaxies, birds, ants, trees, people, noses, hair, face, lip, all that will one day come out of me, he's saying. And you see here this little triangle here, which also is a word for land or earth. Well, this triangle corresponds to geometry. That one day this clay god will start creating shapes using sacred geometry. And it is a falling triangle, implying gravity. That when he starts to move and make shapes, he will do so by shaping them and keeping them centered and cohered through the forces of gravity. And even though he will make many blooms, here we have two blooming sedge plants. This corresponds to blooming within and blooming without. There's going to be a metaphysical blooming within this clay of infinite space. There's going to be metaphysical worlds, and there's going to be physical worlds. Both will bloom, and they will reflect each other. They will be the same worlds, just one on the inside, one on the outside, called synchronicity. These two glyphs lay the foundation of synchronicity from the beginning or before the beginning of creation. And this tick mark here, this one, it's repeated here in the word wa, which is here, who art one, meaning, although I will appear to have many forms, they are all made of the same one clay. You will have gay people, heterosexual people, black people, white black people, because white people, there's only one race, Africans, who became more or less pale or black. You will have trees and flowers, you will have birds and animals. Things will look different, but they're all made of the same stuff. They're all made of particles, of electrons and atoms. The oneness will be inherent in the manyness, but you have to look with a spiritual and a more scientific eye to see. Although things look different, they are structurally the same materials. Electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, it's all the same. Just different electromagnetic ratios. Okay? So I love this word Tatunin because it is a rich, rich teaching. And the gay men that went to the temple of Tatunin learned all this. They learned the secrets of the vacuum, the secrets of the origin of matter and mass. You see? And again, because he's squatting, he's saying that at my stage, at this level of the universe, of space, everything is still, nothing is moving, everything's at rest. Because the equation is net summed, zeroed out. Okay? And this, like I said already, wa, which means one, implies again there's only one creator. And this wa, and this word tells you, unlike what a lot of white racist scholars have done, many white academited universities and educational systems, yes, I said academited, have very often in history besmirched black people and African accomplishments in order to enslave us. So they had to make us look stupid and non-cultural and barbaric and brutish and in need of the great white hope who brought the light of knowledge or whatever BS they have in their logoria. Logoria is diarrhea of the mouth. Logos means words, rhea means diarrhea. I call it logoria, mouth diarrhea, people that talk a bunch of mess all day long. And a lot of these academic scholars do this, and they talk down about Africa. But it's time that we push back and don't allow it to happen. So what these racist, academic, white scholars have done is a bamboozle on us by saying, well, African ways were polytheists. They believed in many gods. Well, this is saying there's only one, wa, one. Where the word one comes from is this Egyptian word, wa. Wa, one, you hear the roots. There's only one creator who takes many forms. But when the white people do this, in Judaism or Christianity, they call the many forms angels. So when it's called an angel, oh, that's not polytheistic. But we call it a voodoo god, or Neteru, or Norisha, or Loa, all of a sudden it's voodoo. It's polytheistic. But that's racism at its finest vulgarity. But we're going to reestablish the truth of it by what's written in the text from thousands of years ago. And it says here, Tatunin, the creator God, one, there's only one of him. You are one body made of trillions of cells. When you take something for your heart, are you being polytheistic? When you take something for your liver, are you being polytheistic? No. Each organ is like an angel, a God that serves the one you. Yes? It's like a demigod inside of the one God, quote unquote, that is you. Well, you actually are a divine being. A neteru. You see? So, now that we've broken down this fantastic word of matter that is one, that was shaped geometrically according to sacred geometry, creating gravitational mass. This little t means mass. This little bird u means to spiral, meaning a Fibonacci spiral. That cosmic, that the vacuum, which is one thing that unites us all. Space unites all things. There's nothing not inside of space that you know of. So space unites all things through gravity generated, which generates sacred shapes and mass in a Fibonacci spiral. Remember, spirals mean the spinning of matter towards the center, and as it goes towards the center, it gets denser. As it gets denser, it gets hotter. It gets hotter, it makes more chemicals, more elements, and explodes into a sun. This will happen on two planes, both metaphysical and physical, generating electromagnetic forces from this God's potential, which is now externalized as shown by this whip. Because a whip only works when you take it outward. You have to flick it out. That's when it does what it has to do. So we use this flail or this whip, saying an outward motion, a centrifugal motion, a manifest motion versus a potential motion. And all of this is within the one cosmic being called space. So what does Tatunen mean in one word? He is the God of space. He is the God of the vacuum itself. You see? Now that we've broken that down a little bit, there's much more to Tatunen. I teach this in the Golden Beetle Shamanic Training, where we go more in depth. I will give you a taste of some of the depth that we take this to. So here we said we saw Tatunen here, or Tatun, as a kind of hollow looking figure, an empty figure filled with space, just an outline, and he's at rest. This is scientific code for the vacuum is in an equilibrium state. Zero net sum effect, so it looks empty and still and quiet. But if you disturb the equation, the EM equation here, then all of a sudden you're going to see vortices forming and disruptions in the equation, which you recognize as forms and shapes. Now, if one had to study, if one had to find what is the most perfect shape where there's equilibrium on every level, at every vector, we saw here geometry is going to be the force of creation of forms. So this little triangle is saying you need to think about what form, what geometric shape contains the most balanced vectors or lines, where every single line is the same length. If you have that, if every single line is the same length, then it will look invisible because it's a zero net sum. Everything cancels out. Well, there is something, there is a shape that is the shape of his soul. Space that looks invisible to you has a shape that is so balanced, like these scales saying, when a thing is balanced, it looks like zero. When you balance your checkbook, it equals zero in the end. Everything is equaling out. What you spend, what you have left, they equal out. There it is. And it's called the isotropic vector matrix. The isotropic vector matrix, meaning iso means same, tropic means turns or angles, vector means line, and matrix means structure. So, The isotropic vector matrix is how the white man describes Tatunen. What I'm saying to you. Now, let me be clear about this. The white man did not discover the isotropic vector matrix. He discovered it recently for white people. But we knew about this structure a long time ago. Because the isotropic vector matrix is made up of what's called a 64 tetrahedron grid. I go into this more in detail during the training, but just trust me, this structure here is made of a 64 tetrahedron grid. A tetrahedron is, imagine a pyramid whose base is not square but is a triangle. You have 4 triangles. 3, like a pyramid. You have 3 sides that are triangular, and the base is also triangular. That's basically a tetrahedron. Okay? And so, this shape here has 64 tetrahedrons in a very precise locking combination where there's no space between them. And without going too technical, and perhaps here, you see it says composed of adjacent tetrahedron and octahedron. A tetrahedron is like what I said, a 4-sided pyramid whose base is also a triangle. An octahedron is like 2 pyramids with a square base touching. So they have their base is square, but there's one going to the left, like you see. Let's see where we can see it in this image. Well, you got a pyramid here with a square base in blue here, and you have a red mirror one going down. You see here? So you have a blue pyramid here with a square base, and then you have right here a red mirror counter image, a counterpoint or fugue or Baroque music, point counterpoint. So 2 pyramids mirroring each other, one pointing up, one pointing down. That's an octahedron. Okay? So it's composed of adjacent tetrahedra and octahedra. And this was known to the Kemau because of this glyph here, this eye, called the Eye of Ra. And the Eye of Ra was used as each of these segments of the Eye of Ra are fractions. They were used for measure. Okay? So, for example, this little front part of the white of the eye was the 1/2. It means 1/2. The pupil means 1/4. The eyebrow here means 1/8 of a fraction. Okay? The back white of the eye here means 1/16. The curlicue here means 1/32, and listen to the last set of numbers I say. This little line here was the Egyptian hieroglyph for 1/64. What did I call this? The 64 tetrahedron grid isotropic vector matrix. Let me say it again. The 64 tetrahedron grid isotropic vector matrix. A lot of words. But we just said Tatunen. Because this structure is the only one possible. There is none other in all the known universe that can create vectors or lines that are isotropic, equal, where every single white line you see here is the same length, generating an overall net sum cancel out effect. So emptiness looks like this geometrically and like this spiritually, and folds itself into shapes according to the codes in his name. Gravity, geometry, mass, Fibonacci spirals, metaphysical and physical electromagnetic forces. You see, we have this triangle of gravity and EM forces, the three great forces in the universe. Gravity, electricity, magnetism. In potential state, or in a balanced equilibrated state, or in a 64 tetrahedron grid isotropic vector matrix. Okay? All right. Now, this shape is the same thing as this God. When you got to know him, they taught you how to draw this. And they also drew it with this, because this is showing fractions up to the 1/64th. So this I means an eye on space, because this eye was used not to measure distance, but only to measure volume, like the volume of your cylinder or your granary house to store grain. This eye was used only to measure volumes, which means space. But they were so clever, those gay Africans. They said, let's hide it in plain sight. No pun intended, plain sight with an eye. Let's make this eye a symbol of fractions up to 1/64th, use it only to measure granaries and boxes and volumes, to hide this message. You see the brilliance of it? Something so simple. Then what they did was, okay, they said, well, this eye, how did they learn to draw it? Well, you look here at the brain, you will see it. Here the eyebrow is here, the corpus callosum. Here you have the pupil, called the thalamus. Here's the pupil, the thalamus. Here you have the hypothalamus. See the little going down here, the hypothalamus? Looks like this little thing. Then you have here this line curling, making the cerebellum, medulla oblongata. The cerebellum and medulla. The medulla and then the cerebellum. You see here you have this line. This line here with a little notch right there, that notch. You see this line here and this kind of bulbous area called the pons. There it is. So this eye is in your brain. This is called the eye of Ra, who is a bird man. He's got the head of a hawk and the body of a man, a beautiful African man. So this eye here is nothing but a code for the bird. This is called the bird brain. These structures in the middle of the brain, called sometimes the limbus system, is also referenced as the bird brain, because birds have this brain rather developed. That's why we call the eye of a bird god Ra. So through self-similarity, we're seeing the brain and the eye and the brain. So let's finish putting the pieces together. If this eye means the measure of space, how to measure space or volume, or how to perceive, because an eye is used for looking and seeing, how to see how space is measured, which is through a 64 tetrahedron grid vector isotropic matrix. How do we get the student to understand what I'm talking about? We have to activate the bird brain rituals. You see here? We have to activate. You see the eye here, for example, has this arrow here that says hypothalamus pituitary? Kind of this part that sticks out. That's the front part of the eye here. That is your pituitary. So they said, we have to awaken the inner eye, the third eye. This is your third eye, the midbrain. bird brain. So if we give the students the proper chants and rituals, ceremonies, verses from the Book of the Dead, the right nutrition to turn this part of the brain on, what will happen is this brain will light up like Ra, the sun god, meaning this eye will see the light. But the light will be within its own brain, within the student's own brain. He will see the light. What light? The light of the 64th, meaning the 64 tetrahedron grid isotropic vector matrix of space. You see? So, the Kamau built systems of wisdom based upon this, many systems of wisdom, some which are most esoteric in the Golden Beetle teachings. But one is, if you look here, I said tetrahedron and octahedron. Tetra means 4. Octa means 8. The name of the god of wisdom, one of his names is Tehuti. That was the god of diviners and astrologers and the great think tank of Black Egypt. The real think tank people went to the temple of the ibis bird, Tehuti, the god of wisdom. So first of all, his name Tehu means to measure, and T means double. That's called an equation. An equation is an equal sign with 2 factors on each side of the equal sign. You got to measure one half to the other. So now we're talking about a mathematician god, a geometer. The name of his city, the town sacred to this god of measure, was called Khemenu, which means 8. The word Khemenu means the number 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Octa, 8, octa, like octopus. So in the city of the god of wisdom, who's also a bird man, like the bird brain, you had to go to the city of the 8 to learn his wisdom of how to measure everything to just balance, how to learn the formulas of life. And so you had to study the 8. Now there's also something called the Ogdoad, the 8 great gods of creation. Those gods were discovered in his town of Khemenu. The 8 gods of the clay of Nun. Amun, Amunan, or Amunet. Kekui, Kekwa. Nenu, Nenua. Jehu, Jehua. Spelled different ways. Jehu, Jehut, or Jehu, Jehua. Different ways of spelling it. But these 8 features of space, the clay, the vacuum. But look, the vacuum is composed of a feature of 8s, shaped like pyramids. That's why we had a pyramid in Egypt, to remind the initiate of what he learned in his bird brain enlightenment, when Ra flooded this brain with light and he saw this structure. Then there was an oracle called Afa in Egypt, Afa, which became Ifa in Yoruba when the whites were coming down from the north to terrorize Kemet. The pharaohs dispatched many of his shrines throughout Africa to hide the mysteries. He sent some even outside of Africa to South America, the Olmec people, to the Naks, N-A-K-H-S of Black China, South China, to southern India, to Easter Island, to Hawaii. He dispatched them around the world to protect them from the dragon of the north, the Vikings, and the Aryans coming down. So he sent to West Africa, to the Yoruba people, the shrine of Afa. They called it Ifa, or Ifa. And in that system, the high priest, called the Babalao, when he does a reading, throws a chain or uses some palm nuts to generate 8 strokes, which are written as 2 sets of 4. Octa strokes written as 2 tetra. And then the blacks of China took this eye of 64 and made a wonderful, or preserved a wonderful system called the Yijing Oracle, which is 64 hexagrams. 64. Just like our beloved 64 tetrahedron grid isotropic vector matrix. And when you throw the oracle of Afa, Ifa, Yijing, it answers you. The universe or space or the creator or Tatunin gives you an answer. And the answer is given to you through a binary code of tetrahedra and octahedra based upon a binary system of 1 stroke, 2 stroke, open stroke, closed stroke, zeros and ones, let's call the computer. So this I is the computer, the oracular computer of the God of the universe, of space, of the vacuum. If you want to talk to the universe, you come to an African reading, which is superior to the Yijing. But the Yijing is very, very good too. But you're seeing these strange coincidences. The Yijing is based upon 0 and 1, on and off, yang line, yin line. The Yijing is made of 6 lines. You write from the bottom up 6 lines. Why 6? Well, because 6, which is a honeycomb shape, is the first shape in geometry where every line is equal to the other line, where every vector is the same length. So it's the first stable equilibrium structure in nature. Perfectly balanced, the honeycomb shape, that 6-sided shape. The hexagon, what some call the Star of David, yes, which has 6 sides. Now if you drew a hexagon in 3D, you would have 12. You would have 12 vectors radiating from the center, so 12 lines radiating out from the center like wires, and you would have 12 edge boundaries along the periphery. So we get 12, like a zodiac. Now the zodiac's made up of really 6 signs with polarity. The ram, opposite the ram of Aries, is the scales of Libra. But they form one axis pole. Opposite the bull of Taurus is the scorpion of Scorpio. But they form one axis. So it's really 6 axes, each having a half, for 12. So what I'm saying is that the zodiac is actually a honeycomb, the most perfect and the first totally balanced shape, where all the vectors, the edge vectors and the radial vectors, are equal. In a triangle, you can have an equilateral triangle, but they have no radial vectors. It's just edge vectors, 3 edge vectors. But you need to have, for the universe, the radiating force, which is shown here as electricity, the radiative force, yes, and the magnetic force, which goes inward, kind of like gravitational force. You have to have an outward and an inward, what we call a toroidal space, like a donut space, going from the center out and up, and from the center down and in at the same time. But that's getting too involved. So you have to have in the universe a force that goes out, a force that stabilizes, and a force that goes in. So the radial lines, like the spokes lines, like the spokes of a wheel, the spokes of the honeycomb shape are of the same length as the edge of the honeycomb. So the spokes can be seen as going out from one point of view, or going in from the other point of view, going out from the center to the edge. If you're standing on the center, they're going in towards the center from the edge. And then they have a boundary of the 6 sides on the edge. So the zodiac is really a honeycomb, which is the first perfectly balanced shape with both radial and vector and boundary vectors. Then you double that in 3D, you get a 12-sided figure, which is called a zodiac wheel. And that's why when you study your zodiac, as the very first glyph on the first video I did on the Book of the Dead was a 5-pointed star. I said this book is about the stars and your chart, because your zodiac chart is a representation of the universe from the most balanced angles. That if you follow that wheel of your chart, you will enter a completely balanced vector space, a vector field that's completely harmonized. And if you follow that, you'll become balanced. You see? And to understand all this, we have to enlighten your bird brain, your pineal gland, your corpus callosum, your thalamus, your medulla, your hypothalamus, your pituitary. We have to do rituals to activate this inner sight, this inner bird brain, which can see above the physical world. That's why it's a bird's brain, a bird's eye, that can understand the mysteries of space-time, which Einstein was studying. His name, by the way, is interesting fractally. Ein means one, and Stein means stone. This glyph here, this little half lobe here, and this long oval also means Stein, stone or matter. Einstein, his name interestingly means, one could say, he who finds the one mystery of matter. He discovered that, for white people, that energy and matter are the same thing. He saw it's one Einstein, one stone, one matter, one substance. But that's a kind of fractal thing we use with names to see how names reveal omens about things, but we don't want to digress too far. Here we have an image more closely of the brain, and you can see here these same features. This little notch here, this little notch here, this kind of way it V's out, the way it V's out here, the first white part of the eye towards the nose, etc., etc. So you can study this and see correlates. And if you start taking nutraceuticals, vitamins and nutrients to stimulate these brain features, these brain sections, you will start getting light, because this is the eye of Ra, the god of light, and you will start understanding the mysteries of space-time. You will also understand oracles. You will also understand the origin of all matter, mass and form, and how it's all one, one. So, I want to touch on one little detail here, which is this glyph here, which is a blooming leaf, but it has this interesting feeling of bending to it here. This kind of bending, and of course bending implies spin. Spin and gravity. You see? And this feature of the bending glyph used by the great masters who wrote the language to encode African science. We wrote our scientific formulas in plain sight through pretty pictures and graphic forms for the right spiritual brain. White people write their formulas in these kind of delta equals f to the 7th, very left brain, which is the evil brain, which makes you Frankenstein scientists in the end, where you don't connect your scientific investigation and revelations to anything sacred. So you can make napalm, you can make all kinds of pesticides, and you don't care because you're doing it from the left wicked brain, the brain of separation and of the ego. But we did it differently. This is a formula of science, as I'm showing you right now. It's a vector equilibrium matrix, shown here with gravitational fields and EM fields, etc., etc., torsion fields, Fibonacci spirals of this little bird here. Because the quail chick is the spiral, because quails, when they dance, when they do a little mating dance, they spin. It's very cute. They do a kind of rotating spinning dance. So we said, oh, this creature has the Fibonacci spiral in his heart. So he meant spin. And so you see here we have this glyph of the bird that dances by spinning. And the next thing, what do you see? Bent hieroglyphs. Bent hieroglyphs. Implying angular momentum. That when the universe, when the clay or the great cosmic waters spin, not only do they spin, Einstein said that gravity is basically, if you imagine if you had a piece of taut cloth, or you had a taut cloth and you put a heavy ball in the middle, and you put little marbles around it, that the ball, which maybe we could say is the sun, would press down or warp time-space and cause the marbles to spin around the kind of funnel shape made in that time-space distortion. What Einstein didn't include was not only does the space warp inward, but it twists like a pretzel. It makes kind of like a hurricane shape. It doesn't just go in, it goes in and it does a little twist like a dance, like a quail bird. You see? And that kind of twist is what's called torsion or Coriolis effect. And that's what creates intense gravitational field. That's what creates many of the forces that we know in the universe. Well, there are only really two basic ones, which are gravity and EM fields. But that's discussed again much more in the Golden Beetle training for the gay shamans. Advanced work. So, in other words, I'm simply saying that creation is a gravitational effect in matter, an EM effect, and a spin, a torsion effect. And it's very important that when you calculate things in physics, you don't forget how spin affects something. Okay, how rotation and bending affects things. And to make sure the initiate did not forget that, we had them see these glyphs right after the little bird that spins in a Fibonacci spiral. So, that brings us to about the end of this. I know we only covered really one word, followed by this word wa, meaning one, telling you within all this diversity, it is still only one. Never forget that. Never forget. All the gazillion, Google, million, billion things you see in the universe, they look different, but they're still only in the one space. They are formed within the space of the one. And I love the definition of the Creator as space. Imagine what the world will look like if that's how its greatest minds, its leaders, its greatest scientists saw it. Instead of saying God, we say space. Now obviously that means we're all linked, because we're all in the same space when the sun sets. Space unites all things within it. So if we had a world where that was the view of the greatest minds and leaders of the time, it would look like ancient Egypt. Sacred cities built upon harmonic ratios and layouts of grids on the earth. It would be the glory of Africa, North Africa, which we're going to revive. So, may you find the infinity of space within your life. And within that space, may you create new possibilities within your chart, your honeycomb, isotropic vector matrix equilibrium. And may you do so by awakening your bird brain's eye within your mind, that you may see the light of Ra shining all around you in the unified field of space. Dwawend Hotepu.